Maradona's got the ball. He dribbles it past the English players. One comes up from behind. He dodges the next one, passes the defense, reaches the goal. The goalie comes out, but Maradona doesn't strike. He dribbles the ball past the goalkeeper too, and then in it goes. The most beautiful goal ever. The whole move took exactly 10.2 seconds. He created a work of art.
The image becomes indelible. It becomes history.
It was very upsetting at the time, and I was crying.
England, the world champions, are out of the 1970 World Cup.
That was really the end of our World Cup hopes, probably ever.
It was genuinely a unique and beautiful moment. The sexual tension came from watching together.
Say you're traveling somewhere, driving around, and you meet someone who's a football fan, someone who loves the World Cup. You can ask them what they were doing.
I knew every German player. I knew what they looked like and how they played. The fact that they were world champions really meant something. It was as if they were my friends.
Ein Spiel, aber das populärste Spiel, das die Welt kennt.
The 1954 World Cup was the first post-war tournament Germany took part in. I was 12 years old at the time. In my mind, the older generation was completely occupied with the reconstruction effort. The war was over, people were saving money, and football wasn't very important to them. They would have never dreamt that football could help Germany regain some respect. My father worked for the railways in Husum. He was a mid-level civil servant, and there were strict family rules. I tried to get as good marks as possible at school, because that was the best way of being left alone and being allowed out to play. And going out meant playing football on the street, using whatever we could find. Tin cans, chestnuts, rarely a ball, sometimes a pig's bladder. In terms of sports, my whole childhood was about football. Radio and football.
Auf der Ebene, was Sport angeht, dreht sich Fußball, das Radio und Fußball.
Wir übertragen aus dem Wankdorf-Stadion in Bern das Endspiel die Fußball-Weltmeisterschaft zwischen Deutschland und Ungarn. Reporter ist Herbert Zimmermann.
Der Tag des Endspiels war leider ein Sonntag.
Unfortunately, the day of the final was a Sunday, and the rule in our house was that my parents would go for a walk. But for some strange reason, they made no move to go off into the forest or the fields and leave me with the radio. I had no idea what my father was thinking. For a start, he was not a big football fan, and he was also moody. If he were in a bad mood, he wouldn't let me listen. Or he would have put marching tunes or something like that on the radio. So I had to leave the house. It was shortly before kickoff, and I had no idea where to go. The streets were empty.
Deutschland im Endspiel der Fußball-Weltmeisterschaft. Das ist eine Riesensensation. Das ist ein echtes Fußballwunder. Ein Wunder, das allerdings auf natürliche Weise zustande kam und das wir dem Fußballverstand unserer Spieler und der Vollkommenheit ihres Spiels verdanken. Und dieses Spiel hier hat bereits vor einer Minute mit 7 Minuten Frühzündung begonnen.
Mit Mal rief eine Stimme.
I suddenly heard a voice from a window saying, "Klaus, I thought it was you." And I looked up and saw a woman twice my age, mid-20s or something. I'd seen her before. And then I realized she had been to our house. She was a girlfriend of one of my older brothers or ex-girlfriend. And I said, I don't know where to listen. So she told me to come in.
Und dann sagte sie, ja, komm doch rein.
Schlechtes Abspiel von Liebrich soeben. Und Ungarns Sturm. Kosic müsste schießen. Nachschuss, Puschkas, Tor!
Stellte ein paar Kekse hin, das Spiel lief schon. Ganz schnell stand es auch schon 2-0 für die Ungarn.
She put a couple of cookies out. The match had already started. Hungary was leading 2-0. Then at halftime, I talked to her a bit. It was a strange situation. Me, as a 12-year-old, because of course I had sexual fantasies at that age, but that was not the way things developed. The sexual tension came from watching the game together.
Die Sexualität bestand in diesem gemeinsamen Gucken auf das Spiel.
Eckball von Fritz Walter, Tor von Rahn. Es steht 2:2. Da ist es zu glauben, wir haben ausgeglichen gegen Ungarn, die großartigste Technikerelf, die man kennt.
Man denkt.
When you listen to the radio commentary, you imagine you can see the match. You really believe you can. But what you see is the product of your own imagination. You have the images of the team members, but you're playing yourself. You have the moves. You imagine you're one of the players. The Rahn goal, utter joy. That got her going and she started cheering. I had no idea how she felt about football.
3:2 für Deutschland, 5 Minuten vor dem Spielende.
And then we were counting the minutes. We couldn't wait for the final whistle, and my heart was pounding during these couple of minutes.
Der ist ausgeführt, kommt zu Bocek. Aus, 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 aus! Das Spiel ist aus! Deutschland ist Weltmeister, schlägt Ungarn mit 3:2 Toren im Finale in Bern.
Ich glaube, ich habe sie nie.
I don't think I ever saw her again. I don't know if she moved away or what she did, but it was a unique and beautiful moment with a beautiful stranger who was never again present in my life. It was a little love affair brought on by football, although it was never a real affair at all. Let's call it a football love.
Ohne dass es eine war. Aber eine fußballerische, sagen wir mal so. Ne?
When the 1966 World Cup took place, I didn't follow football at all. So on that day I went and bought a hamster from the pet shop, and the shops were completely deserted in 1966. So 1970 was the first time I'd ever watched a World Cup. So that was why it meant something to me, and of course I believed that England would do well because of having won it in 1966 without any knowledge or foresight as to what would happen in the coming years.
We are Southampton. We are Southampton FC.
I think I'll always support Southampton now because that's been going on for over 30 years. And it's not a team to support if you want to win cups and things. They do silly things. So if they're, like the other day, they were winning 2-0 at Tottenham and they still managed to lose 3-2, there's always an element of comedy at Southampton, really. I prefer that, really, I think. During the 1970 World Cup, I was 12. I generally lived with my father, but I visited my mother sometimes at weekends. And she had a colour television, which was quite rare in those days. So that was very useful for the World Cup, you see.
Germany all in white, England wearing the red shirts they wore in 1966.
I only remember that it was a very sunny day, and I think the kickoff was, it must have been an afternoon kickoff in Mexico, but I think it was early evening in England, so. And I just remember watching the game. I think my mother was present, but not watching it, and my My mother's husband, he was watching it, but he wasn't interested because he preferred rugby. And we did have a German dog. He was German-speaking dachshund, and I think he was called Fritz.
Run at him. The ball for Murray! Alan Murray! Alan Murray!
I remember that very clearly. The game certainly went England's way, with Alan Murray scoring the first goal. And then, just after half-time, Martin Peters scored the second goal. Martin Peters was also a lucky omen because Martin Peters scored in the 1966 World Cup. So things were looking very good. But then I think about 10 minutes or so later, Germany scored their first goal.
Beckenbauer, more still down injured. Beckenbauer in the net. Beckenbauer scored.
And a little bit later, the second goal.
Becker has done it. Almost there is equal.
So it was 2-2. By the time it got to extra time, I think I realised that it was not very likely England would win the game. And then Gerd Müller managed to score.
And then Müller! Müller's done it! Gerd Müller!
It was very sad because as we were 2-0 ahead, I assumed that there was no way we could possibly lose the game. And so it was very upsetting at the time, and I was crying. That might be why I like Southampton, because it's a bit like watching England.
And there is the final whistle, and England, the world champions, are out of the 1970 World Cup.
And the German-speaking dachshund, Fritz, I was very displeased with him. I remember telling him off. I wasn't very happy with him. But nobody else was cared in the house, because my mother, she wasn't bothered. So no, it was just me that was very upset, I'm afraid. That was really the end of our World Cup hopes, probably ever, or forever. The Dachshund died, but it died quite a long time later, after the game, so there's no link between the game against Germany and West Germany and the dog dying, but it died due to natural causes. And it was nothing to do with me. Nobody ever proved anything anyway.
After the game, they asked Maradona how he scored the first goal, and he said it was the hand of God. The response was as good as they come, and it was a really Argentinian thing to say. You often talk about the hand of God. I need the hand of God to guide me. At the time of the game, I was 19. I was a university student. And I was a midfielder. We had to keep our passion for football a secret, because it was still frowned upon intellectually.
La intelectualidad con el fútbol.
At the time, democracy had just been restored. The country had been democratic for a year and a half or two, after having been a dictatorship for more than 10 years. In 1978, we won a World Cup during that military dictatorship. Speaking of politics, we felt it was somehow a shame to have won the World Cup at home during a dictatorship. But today I want to talk about the 1986 Argentina-England quarterfinal.
Argentina-Inglaterra en 1986.
Well, I had just been sacked on the day of Argentina's first match in the World Cup. Argentina won 3-1 against Korea. And like any other day, I went to work. I was told I'd been dismissed, and they were going to give me some money, which I was quite happy about. Firstly, because of the money. Secondly, because I had the month off and could relax and watch the World Cup at home without any guilt whatsoever. And that's what I did.
England against Argentina. So England against Diego Maradona.
I was at my uncle's house with my whole family. The first half was a bruising encounter. And I remember that I went to have a kick around at halftime to calm myself down, because there were just 45 minutes left, and the fate of Argentina was being decided right at that moment. So we sat down in front of the TV again, and it happened 5 minutes into the second half, what later became known as the hand of God.
La tocó para Valdano, entra Diego.
Desesperadamente piden mano los ingleses.
Maradona sigue, la jugada corre. Y cuando el arquero va a salir.
Maradona ran forward, and when the goalkeeper jumped, he jumped too. And he seemed like he was about to head the ball. But instead, he tapped the ball with his hand. He pulled it off brilliantly. It was almost invisible. It was so invisible that the ref didn't see that he'd scored with his hand. In other countries, like Germany for instance, it would be unthinkable for a player to score a goal with his hand and for people to love him for it. Inconceivable, because German people don't like little tricks like that. So it was a very Argentinian scam. But it wouldn't have been easy to defend, either for Maradona or for Argentina, if he hadn't also scored the second goal that match. The whole move took exactly 10.2 seconds, and every Argentinian knows it. It was an incredible moment. When he dribbled past the third player, we were all glued to our seats at home because we knew what was coming, and he was unstoppable. In the end, Argentina won 2-1. We made it to the semis and then the final, and we won the World Cup. I think that broke a taboo. Finally, you could tell the world that you loved football without shame. You could be an intellectual, read, write, and also watch football. Everyone could be a fan from that moment on, thanks to Maradona. I love Maradona. Ergo, I love football. He would respond to questions poetically and philosophically. Plus, he was an artist, because his second goal was a work of art. It made his people happy. That match was almost more important than the final, than winning the final.
Casi más importante ese partido, fue casi más importante que la final, haber ganado la final.
It's about a leather ball that either rolls into the net or doesn't. When you really watch it, it's totally absurd. But that's the charm of it all, that people find something that's actually completely uninteresting and hype it up like crazy. What I remember is the final match of the 1994 World Cup, Italy against Brazil playing in the U.S. That's also the match that was the subject of my documentary, which looked at how people all over the world reacted to the match. The film was called The Final Kick, which is almost a prophetic name because at the end, Baggio would miss his penalty. And that was the final kick, so to speak. It decided the match.
Das sozusagen der Final Kick war, weil genau dieser Final Kick das Spiel entschieden hat. Ich war gerade eigentlich noch Filmstudent.
I was still a film student. I was studying in Dortmund's University of Applied Sciences and Art, and was still a complete greenhorn. It was basically my first serious film. I started very small. First, I rode my bike to the main post office. There was a room with all of the phone books from across Germany in this big hall. That's what they did back then. So I got the addresses of about 60 different embassies and wrote to all of them. I told them I wanted to make a film and asked them if they could give me the addresses of local filmmakers. Then I borrowed 500 Deutschmarks from my father for postage.
Mark geliehen für Porto und habe das Projekt beschrieben.
I wrote a letter describing the project and sent it to all the filmmakers. The preparation took 2 years. The match itself was so exciting that I was almost beside myself when it was taking place. I knew that 40 teams all over the world were filming for me. I was incredibly nervous because I know, well, I had no idea what was going to happen.
Ich wusste überhaupt nicht, was passiert.
Both teams had really, truly outstanding defenses. That's why the match dragged on like it did. There were 1 or 2 really close calls when someone almost scored a goal.
Wo der eine fast ein Tor gemacht hätte.
They're not samba dancing today, are they? I think they must be either very, very nervous like the
There were some stretches where I almost lost faith in the project. I thought, my God, this is going to be boring. Just do something. Someone please just shoot a goal and become world champion.
Einfach ein Tor und einer ist Weltmeister. Dann gab's eine Verlängerung, in der eigentlich gar
And then they went into overtime and nothing happened. They just ran back and forth and tried this and tried that and nothing worked. So it went to penalties.
Roberto
Baggio had a minor injury. He probably shouldn't even have taken that shot, but he did anyway. And he fired the ball way over the bar.
Einfach drüber geschossen, und zwar nicht so knapp.
Roberto Baggio, the savior of Italy. He's missed it, and Brazil win the World Cup.
Das ist natürlich tragisch.
It was tragic, of course, because he was the linchpin of Italian soccer back then, and of that squad. And when the match was over, I was at my wit's end. I went for a walk and thought, that's it. This will be the worst film ever. And then the tapes started arriving day after day, and it was like Christmas. I opened the packages and popped them in the viewer and thought, wow, unbelievable.
Reingetan und hast gedacht, irgendwie Wahnsinn.
My film was shown in all 40 countries. It won the German Grimme Award, which was also fantastic. For me, as a film student who hadn't graduated yet, that was better than any degree.
Eigentlich besser als das Diplom.
If there'd been a goal in the 10th minute, the film wouldn't have been nearly as good.
Und dementsprechend hätte ich vielleicht auch
I wouldn't have won the award.
Und hätte dann danach nicht irgendwie
That would have been the end for me.
Und so weiter. Also es war für mich schon eine ganz, ganz wichtige
It opened a lot of doors for me.
in meinem Berufsleben, die ich mir da
I earned it. Or rather, the two teams had earned it for me.
Mir erspielt haben, ja, kann ich so sagen. Wenn man reist, ja, wenn man durch die Gegend fährt.
Say you're traveling somewhere, driving around, and you meet someone who's a football fan. Someone who loves the World Cup. You can always ask them, what were you doing in 1990? Where did they watch the match? You can talk about matches that took place 20 years ago. And you know that they're just sitting in their living rooms right now watching the matches. There's something really nice about that. The match itself isn't all that important. What's important is knowing everyone is there for the next 90 minutes all over the world. And what matters is this ridiculous leather ball. There's something very powerfully human about that because it shows that people everywhere are basically all the same. They all go to work, they have to eat, they're happy when their children are healthy, and they enjoy watching the final match of the World Cup. There's something very unifying about that.